The 1920 Type M, 1.5 horsepower, and we done got that crankcase painted up inside yonder. High gloss enamel. Also, we done already got that crankshaft set right. Not much to be said about a crankshaft. That's not already been said in a past video, but this one right here, it had that high place, as a lot of them do, in the center of this journal right here. Also, this particular engine here, the flywheels had worn on the bearing flange side to where this crankshaft could go side to side, and when it did that, it would let this right here right against the rod bearing on both sides when that crankshaft moved. Also, on the side of the gear right here, it would let that go over and ride against the side cover, and it to the point where that it's wore an undercut right there, and even worn the timing mark away. So we'll set that right, and then file that away, and just emery cloth. Spent some time here on the workbench, just rotating the crankshaft and working it with the emery cloth, checking it with the micrometer at different places on here, around and around and around, so that you do not end up with a egg-shaped throw. Got this all cleaned up, ready to go. That's about all we can say about this crankshaft. And in the meantime, what I discovered. First, let's get this out of the way. The O-ring that I took out of there, the person that I got the engine from had made an offhand remark that it leaked water, that the water leaked out of it during the night time. So I went on ahead and took this O-ring out, and it's quite hard, brittle. It don't have no elasticity to it. But when you take them out, you can look at them, and they will tell you something about the engine. And if you look at this one, about 75% maybe around it's black right there where it was stuck, where it was adhered to the cylinder. Okay, this part right here is dry and rusty. It has not been making contact with anything. So we got us a new O-ring, and that's what I'm going to put in. That's what I'm doing now. I'm going to put the cylinder sleeve in it now, and then I'll proceed in the morning with installing the piston. But to get us up to date, the piston, and this is the kind of stuff that you are going to run into. It had issues, so took it apart, and I discovered that, I'll show you. I discovered that the bushing is loose in the rod. The rod is worn out in here. Now I will fix this. I'll put an oversized bushing in there, and then I will ream it to an oversized wrist pin, and I'll ream this when I put the new bushing here. Then I'll ream all three of those holes to the same size, and then make a new wrist pin that will fit that, with about 1 or 1.5, about even down to a 0.5 thousandths play. I mean, really tight, but loose. So we'll set this aside. But this if you had bought this engine, then at this point you would have to find yourself a new rod and a new piston, or either do the machine work. And if you put the bushing on that wrist pin, it's worn a lot. And the problem here is the wrist pin is loose in the piston. So, and I did mark this right here. It's 991.5 memory. 991 is the original size. So it's the piston that's worn. All of this was loose, and it just pounded itself to death. So at that point, you've got the price of another piston, a replacement piston, and those rings. These rings right here, now you could take them off of this piston and put them on this piston and use them, but they are really slick. They are really slick. So I'm not going to use them in this engine, simply because it is a. And another thing too is the side plate. The side plate we got. I measured it earlier. I think it's 12 thousandths on the two top ones and 14 thousandths on the two bottom. Now that's side plate like this right here. So most likely those rings are worn on the sides. If you put this piston here and a new set of cast iron rings, and if you put that piston ring in that groove, and I did put the micrometer to that, and it's only about 2 thousandths on two of them and 3 thousandths on the other two. Really good fit. So I'm going to put those new set of rings here, new here, and the wrist pin that was in this piston, and this rod was out of another engine, and this was out of another engine. But when you put it in there, it is very good. The best I could tell, it's about 4 thousandths, possibly 5 thousandths plate. Really good to be a used rod. And I cleaned up the bearing that was in the engine. We're going to use it. So that gets us up to that and that and that. The fuel pump. Now this was on a $450 engine, but you can see that this is an old-time repair. You will find things like this quite often. It was welded here. The cast iron part was welded, and that's a really good repair. It has helped. And then somewhere along the line, the housing broke. And most likely it was bumped or something, because this is the bolt that was in here with no bushing in this. The bushing was gone out of here, and then they replaced that with that 1/2-inch bolt, and it's wobbly. But this went in here, and it stuck through yonder a little more than 1/2 of an inch, and I'll show you what they done. So you kind of have to decide now, am I going to have to get a new fuel pump? Because this one is trying to come apart again. See, the little piece there is loose. Actually, it'll come out. I'm not going to fool with it too much. But I'll show you something. This is the side cover right here that was on that engine. And it's got a lot of paint left on it. You know, probably 80% or more original paint, even after I washed it down. And that was one of the reasons that I washed it with the diesel fuel, is I did not want to remove any paint. But what happened when they broke that bolt off, that stud, when they broke that stud off, well, I'll show you. This was the original stud that would have went in this housing right here. It's a 7/16 thread on there, and this part of this housing was not was not threaded. It was just a hole went in yonder that was the size of this 7/16 stud, and it went through there and came through, and this part right here screwed into the engine block. Well, when I took that broken stud out, that left me with a good 7/16 thread. So at that point, and then I would not use this anyway on a repair. I mean, this was all right when it was done. It was okay. But what they done, they did not take this off the engine. It showed none of this showed any indication of having ever been removed from the engine. But what they done, they drilled in there and then tapped 13 thread, and then you can screw it in there. And when it comes in the backside, it's that amount right there is the amount that was in the block in that past video that was stuck in there. So in order for me to set this right correctly at this point, and there's several ways you could do, well, there's a couple of ways that you could do this. You could weld that up and then drill and ream back to this size. But what I'm going to do, the one that has the oversized end on it, and it's only a few thousandths oversized, and I'll put it in the lathe over there, and then I'll drill in the center of that a 7/16 hole right through yonder. Oh, it'll be thin. It will really be thin. And then I'll screw that in here. Maybe set it in there with a epoxy of some type. Set that right, and then I will saw this off, saw the back off, and then mill that off flat, and that will give a flat surface for that fuel pump to mount to, and then the stud will go through that. And I'm sure somebody would do that. If you just put this on there and then put this in there like that, you see how much room, it's like 1/8 of an inch almost right here. It's not that much, but it's quite a bit, and that does not give you enough surface for your fuel pump. Cleaned it up. The timing mark was right there, and I highlighted it with the white paint, so we're good to go. I have already scraped the bearings, and I'll reuse the ones that was in it. They're not wore too bad. They're not bad at all. So we'll put this back on there. Let's see what else comes to mind. Well, I guess just for clarity and to move on, this is the other side cover, and it's the one that has the fine adjustment on the governor on this plate back here. So we will use this. Cleaned up real good. Scraped the bearings. And I also faced these bearings. Where that crankshaft had been free to move sideways, it had pounded a 1/16 of an inch at least wire ring around there. Let's see if I had one of those somewhere. Okay, here's an old set that was out of something else. It was not out of this engine. But as you can see, that this highest point here was the original dimension on that bearing, on that bushing. Well, for some reason, it wore this inside here and that's like a 1/16 of an inch too. So if you was going to use this bearing in an engine, then you would face that off so that it would be flat, and that way when it rides against this right here, you'll have full 100% contact. Or on the other side, the crankshaft itself, the flywheel itself. But we'll set that right. And one other thing, and I'm going to put a different one on there. Most of the time you can look at these and tell how bad they are wore. You can see this one is quite thin on the bottom right here. Thinner on this side than it is this side. So when you put that on to the housing, you can see it's loose, very, very loose, and that's supposed to be a fairly tight fit. Plus it has been broken welded, so we will replace this. All of these things that you do to replace and get the correct parts onto an engine does add to the price that you have invested in the engine.